The moment Silas Vance realized he had lost wasn't when the stock dropped to zero.
It was the sterile echo of a name he had never given, spoken with chilling authority across the mahogany conference table, a name that carried the unmistakable timbre of his own voice, but none of his legitimacy.
Silas Vance did not believe in disorder. His world, Vance Global, was a meticulously calibrated engine, fueled by precision and restrained ambition.
He stood atop a fortune built on extraction and arbitrage, a worldview where every human interaction was a transaction, every emotion a potential liability to be mitigated.
His personal life was equally compartmentalized. The penthouse on Central Park West was a monument to minimalist control, vast, silent, and cold. He was a man who understood the geometry of power. Distance equaled safety. And yet, there was one necessary, controlled breach of that safety.
Every month, on the 15th, an automated wire transfer left the Vance account. A substantial sum, large enough to ensure comfort, small enough to preclude leverage. It was the financial embodiment of a secret, a biological fact, nothing more.
The recipient was Miriam Thorne, a woman he had known briefly years ago when proximity had momentarily outweighed caution. With her, she held the proof, a son.
Silas never met the boy. He insisted on the distance. The contract was clear, drafted by 3 separate legal teams. Funds would flow as long as the Vance name was never used, and the existence of the child remained strictly confidential.
Silas didn't see this as abandonment. He saw it as management. He had neutralized the risk and converted biological consequence into a manageable monthly expense. He had purchased silence, stability, and the complete absence of a relationship.
It was a clean ledger.
He used to tell his chief counsel, Malcolm, that the greatest mistake the wealthy made was allowing messy human variables into the structured equations of their lives. Silas Vance had no messy variables. He had only accounts payable. For 18 years, the system held. The 15th came, the funds transferred, the world remained predictable. Silas aged, growing sharper, more focused, the weight of his power making him heavier, more immobile, like a bronze statue.
The only time he permitted himself to think of the boy, Elias, was to confirm the contract remained intact. He imagined Elias living a comfortable, unremarkable life, shielded from the brutal expectations that came with the Vance name. Silas believed he had given the boy a quieter, safer form of freedom, the freedom of anonymity.
He was wrong.
The first hint of disruption was not a subpoena or a public outcry. It was a line item buried deep within the annual review of Vance Global's European logistics portfolio. A mid-sized warehousing company in Rotterdam, vital to Vance's supply chain, had suddenly become inefficient. Not bankrupt, but strategically crippled, its debt repackaged, its management diverted by an aggressive, complex series of derivative trades.
Malcolm brought the report to Silas on a Tuesday morning, placing it carefully next to the lukewarm coffee.
It's hostile, Silas. Highly sophisticated. They targeted the weakest point of the cap structure and used our own market data against...
Silas barely looked up from the quarterly metals report. Thorne Investments, based out of Zurich, started small about 3 years ago. Quiet, run by a very young man, Elias.
The name landed in the silence of the office, heavier than any financial loss. Silas felt a tightening in his chest, not fear, but pure, icy annoyance. He pushed the logistics report away. How?
23. Graduated top of his class at Wharton. Paid cash for his starting capital. Sources. Silas leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking slightly, the only audible disturbance. He permitted himself a small, controlled smile.
Sources known, Malcolm. Very well.
He had paid for Elias Thorne's education, his comfort, and now it seemed his initial seed capital. The boy had taken the money he was given and used it to purchase the tools to attack his source. It was, in its own cold way, logical.
A complex form of interest payment.
Terminated, Silas ordered. Buy the warehouse chain back at a premium.
Liquidate Thorn investments if you can. Show no.
And
Silas looked out over Manhattan, an endless, controlled grid of glass and steel. The boy is a minor disturbance, a poorly aimed bullet we paid for. Manage the variable, Malcolm. Do not elevate it to...
But Silas had made the fatal error of assuming that Elias was driven by money. Money was merely the measure of the game. Elias was driven by the one thing Silas had denied him: recognition.
Elias Thorne did not liquidate. He pivoted.
He had learned early that the only thing louder than a secret was the sound of a private jet overhead.
He had lived in the shadow of Vance's money, watched his mother receive the monthly deposit, and understood that the true cost of that money was the suppression of identity.
Silas Vance thought he had bought a child's silence. He had actually purchased 20 years of quiet observation. Elias knew the architecture of Vance Global better than some of its division heads, precisely because he viewed it from the outside, with the cold clarity of a predator studying a complex ecosystem.
He did not want to destroy Vance Global. He wanted to take it, piece by piece, as a means of claiming the name he was owed.
He wanted Silas Vance to look him in the eye and acknowledge that the weapon built was crafted from the raw material of his own flesh and blood.
The attacks became systemic, less about profit and more about precision disruption. Elias focused on assets that mattered psychologically to Silas, the oldest holdings, the ones tied to the Vance family mythos. He used complex derivatives to short businesses that relied on Vance infrastructure, forcing Silas to commit massive capital just to maintain the appearance of stability. The pressure mounted not as a flood, but as rising internal pressure. Silas began working 15-hour days again, something he hadn't done in a decade. He was fighting a shadow opponent who seemed to anticipate every defense. A year after the Rotterdam incident, the confrontation became inevitable. Elias launched a daring, high-leveraged raid on Vance's primary debt issuance, threatening to downgrade the company's crucial credit rating right before a massive infrastructure bond was set to launch. This was not noise. This was the core nervous system. Silas scheduled the meeting in the neutral territory of the Vance Global headquarters, in the private executive dining room, floor 88. No lawyers, no staff, just the two of them.
When Elias Thorne walked in, Silas understood instantly the nature of the war.
The resemblance was stark. The same height, the same controlled posture, the same intense, pale eyes that seemed to analyze the room for weaknesses.
But where Silas was heavy, molded by decades of absolute authority, Elias was lean, defined, and utterly devoid of the warmth Silas had carefully buried. Silas did not offer a handshake. He simply gestured to the empty chair across the table. "Thorne," Silas stated, using the name like a sharp dismissal. "You have played an interesting, if reckless, hand. The cost of unwinding this debt position is $400 million. I suggest you accept a counteroffer now before you are—" Elias sat down slowly, deliberately. He wore a suit that cost as much as a small car, tailored with brutal precision. He took a single, controlled breath. "You misunderstand, Mr. Vance," Elias said, his voice calm, pitched slightly lower than Silas's. "I am not looking for profit. I am seeking a controlling."
Silas laughed, a dry, brittle sound that echoed in the vast room. "Of what? A few junk bonds? You are playing with fire, boy. I gave your mother enough money to ensure you had a respectable life."
You have chosen instead to purchase a seat at the table of your own.
"You bought silence," Elias corrected him. "You did not buy loyalty. You bought the absence of the Vance name on a birth certificate. You failed to buy the mind that carried your—"
Elias leaned forward. His eyes did not blink. "I have the $400 million, Mr. Vance, and I have every intention of spending it to force the default. You won't be downgraded. You will be exposed, and the entire market will see the—" Silas stared at him, searching for the crack,
the weakness, the youthful hesitation. There was none. This was Silas's own surgical intelligence weaponized against him.
"What do you?" Silas finally asked, his voice low, heavy with suppressed violence. Elias reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a single folded document. Not a financial statement, but a simple legal declaration.
I want the name. I want the immediate public acknowledgement of paternity. I want my place. When I walk out of this room, I walk out as Elias Vance, and I take a seat on your board. Then, and only then, will I pull the funding back and stabilize you." Silas felt the cold shock of true recognition. The boy didn't want the money. He wanted the identity that money was meant to protect. He was threatening to tear down the entire structure of Silas's carefully constructed life, just for a word.
"You have audacity, Thorn," Silas said, slowly tearing the legal document in half. "You have talent, but you lack understanding. The Vance name is not a negotiation point. It is a legacy earned through structure and discipline. You are a variable I sought to manage, and now you have proven yourself too volatile. You will never bear my—"
Elias stood up. He did not raise his voice. He simply absorbed the rejection.
"Then I will ensure you bear my cost, Mr. Vance," Elias replied. "The market opens in 3 hours. Watch your—"
And just like that, the sun left. The space he occupied became instantly colder.
The following 3 months were a blur of financial warfare that cost Vance Global more than the annual GDP of several small nations. Silas fought with the brutal, absolute authority of a man defending his very identity.
He realized the immense, terrifying power of a rival who needed nothing but revenge. Elias Thorn wasn't seeking profit margins. He was seeking emotional leverage. He made financially irrational moves that were psychologically devastating to Silas.
He targeted the old alliances, the handshake deals, the quiet certainties that anchored Silas's world.
Silas began to see the denial of the name as the catalyst for his own destruction. By trying to keep the ledger clean, he had created an imbalance, an emotional debt that was now demanding catastrophic interest. He started sleeping only 3 hours a night, haunted by the specter of Elias, a mirror image of his younger self, only sharper, colder, fueled by resentment instead of ambition.
One evening, alone in his vast, silent penthouse, Silas looked at the empty spaces, the priceless art, the unobstructed view of the city he owned, and felt a profound, chilling emptiness.
He had successfully created an insulated fortress, but in insulating it, he had ensured no love, no warmth, and certainly no sun could ever penetrate the walls.
He had built a cage of gold, and now the rightful heir was outside, demanding the demolition code.
He pulled out the old file containing the original agreement with Miriam Thorne. The signatures were crisp, the language legalistically tight. He saw the day he had severed the connection, paid the ransom for his peace. He tried to call Miriam, but her number was disconnected. She had used the money to disappear, fulfilling her part of the contract, leaving the son to enact his own justice.
Silas understood then. He hadn't just denied Elias the name, he had denied himself the complexity, the challenge, the profound, messy engagement of fatherhood. He had tried to convert life into a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet was now defaulting.
The internal collapse was quiet. It wasn't marked by tears or sudden panic, but by a chilling, logical acceptance of failure. The failure was not financial, it was existential. He had valued control over connection. The cost was everything.
The final confrontation occurred not in a boardroom, but in a chaotic, overheated trading room in London.
Vance Global was attempting a massive counter-raid, a desperate, high-risk maneuver to dilute Thorn Investments' holdings in a critical Asian infrastructure fund. If Silas won this trade, he would regain crucial momentum.
If he lost, the dominoes would fall, leading to an inevitable, messy takeover. Silas flew to London to personally oversee the execution.
He was exhausted, running on adrenaline and the deep, toxic fear of irrelevance.
Elias was already there, positioned in a small, private office adjacent to the trading floor, coordinating the defense with the cold focus of a seasoned general.
The trade was brutal. Millions moved in milliseconds. The air was thick with the scent of fear and ozone.
For 2 hours, the market watched the two entities, Vance Global, the entrenched giant, and Thorn Investments, the razor-sharp insurgent, fight for the lifeblood of the fund.
Midway through the session, the numbers stabilized, then began to tick decisively downward for Vance Global.
Elias had anticipated the maneuver, had positioned short positions across multiple related markets, effectively turning Silas's aggressive move into a self-inflicted wound.
The screen flashed red. The trade was lost. The fund was lost. Vance Global was fatally exposed.
Silas stood up from the console, his vision blurring. The noise of the trading floor faded into a distant, muffled roar. He felt a sudden, crushing weight settle upon his chest, not symbolic, but physical.
A sharp, searing pain that made him instinctively grab the edge of the monitor.
The lead trader shouted his name, but Silas couldn't hear him. He stumbled, catching himself before he fell, sweat instantly breaking out on his forehead.
He felt himself being guided, gently, away from the floor and into the quiet, pristine isolation of the adjoining executive office. The door clicked shut, muffling the chaos.
He was lowered into a large leather chair. He fought the pain, fought the loss of control, focusing on the ceiling, trying to rationalize the sensation as just another stressor.
When his vision cleared, he saw Elias Thorn standing over him.
The sun did not look triumphant. He looked tired. He held a bottle of water, but made no move to offer it.
"The trade is unwound," Elias stated, his voice flat. "The cost of stabilization is now higher than the market capitalization. The company will be bought out by the—"
Silas tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, replaced by a ragged wheeze. He raised a trembling hand, trying to gesture, perhaps for help, perhaps for a final plea.
Elias watched him. He saw the pale, drawn face, the desperate eyes clinging to life. He saw the powerful man reduced, finally, to pure, vulnerable biology.
"You won," Silas managed to choke out, the word a painful, hollow whisper.
Elias looked down at the architect of his existence, the man who had given him everything except legitimacy. He had spent his entire adult life destroying this man's world to force him into acknowledgement. And now the world was destroyed, and the man was dying. The victory tasted like dust.
"I won the argument," Elias said, his voice quiet. "I did not win the—"
Silas understood. He was about to die, and still he had not given the name. The silence, the denial, had been his last, ultimate act of control. He gasped again, his body slumping, the immense physical pain dissolving into a terrifying realization. He would leave this life, having been nothing more than an ATM and a powerful enemy to his own son. His legacy would be defined by the void he had created.
As the light began to fade, Silas looked into Elias's eyes, searching for anything, pity, hatred, recognition. He found only a terrible, clinical stillness.
Silas tried one last time to form a word, but only a wet, struggling sound emerged.
Elias knelt beside the chair. He reached out, not to comfort him, but to steady his shoulder, anchoring him against the final slide. It was the first physical touch between them. Cold, formal, irreversible.
"It is done," Elias murmured, looking straight into the dying eyes of the man who refused to name him. "Your debt is—"
He watched Silas's breathing slow, then stutter. The color drained from the billionaire's face. The silence returned. This time, absolute. Final.
Just as Silas's eyes fluttered closed for the last time, Elias leaned in, his own composure finally cracking
under the weight of the moment, the years of denial, the years of battle.
He spoke the word into the ear of the dead man, a confession and a claim, all at once.
The name was finally spoken. It carried no power, no warmth, no obligation. It was merely the cold, heavy label for the man who lay dead at his feet.
The aftermath was quiet, swift, and complex.
Elias Thorne, utilizing his newly acquired debt positions, restructured the remnants of Vance Global. He did not take the name Vance publicly. He absorbed the company under the Thorne Investments banner, ensuring the Vance legacy existed only as a cautionary chapter in financial history, a testament to the price of absolute control. He retained the penthouse, but he rarely visited. When he did, he stood in the vast, silent living room, gazing at the cityscape that had once been Silas's domain. He had won the war, proving his intellect, his ruthlessness, and his ultimate biological claim. But he had gained only the right to speak the word father in the echoing silence of a room that held no memory of parenthood. The inheritance was not the empire, it was the chilling realization of the nature of the man who had raised him by denial.
Elias now carried the weight of the name he fought for, a name delivered only in death, binding him forever to the solitary, controlled existence his father had valued above all else.
He sat in the chair, a young man who controlled trillions, contemplating the infinite value of the single word that had cost him everything. We often measure success by what we accumulate, forgetting that sometimes the true cost of a life is measured by what we violently refuse to give away. The refusal of a name, the denial of a relationship, these are not cheap acts of power. They are existential debts that accumulate interest until they demand total liquidation.
The story of Elias Thorne and Silas Vance is not about hostile takeovers. It's about the silent architecture of denial, and how the walls we build to keep others out often end up becoming the walls that crush us. But the most fascinating twist in this story involves Miriam Thorne, the woman who took the money and disappeared. She made a choice 20 years earlier that set this entire tragic battle in motion.
What did she know about Silas Vance's psyche that allowed her to accept the terms of absolute separation? And what did she tell Elias in those formative years that forged him into the perfect, unyielding weapon against his own father?
That decision, the original calculus of silence, is the core of our next deep dive. If you want to understand the true price of that first contract, you need to see the architect who drafted the terms. Click the notification bell below, and we will explore the untold story of Miriam Thorne, the woman who traded a name for a destiny.